Um, the purpose of this program is to strengthen the capacity of global deal partners which are involved in collective bargaining, grievance handling, and workplace cooperation. Building and strengthening capacity to enable effective social dialogue and sound industrial relations by providing training is one of the key pillars of the work of the Global Deal Support Unit. So together with the ITC, we have developed this capacity building program, and it actually consists of 3 different components. The first one took place already last year. We had 4 global deal sessions during the ILO E-Academy on social dialogue in industrial relations. And I know that some of you also participated in those events. The second component is a self-guided e-learning tool on the SDGs that we will actually launch this coming Thursday. You have probably seen the invitation. And then the third part of this program is the Masterclass Series that we are starting today. Another important part of our work is to increase knowledge of the benefits of social dialogue by developing and sharing good practices and providing research. And you might have seen that we have published several new good practice cases on our website. And I just want to mention a few of those, and I would encourage you to have a look yourself. There is one from Fair Trade, which is about solving workplace disputes in the banana sector in Peru. We have another one on Airbus, which is about handling the impact of COVID-19 through collective bargaining. And as you can imagine, Airbus is, of course, a company that has been really hit by the pandemic. And they have nevertheless negotiated several collective bargaining agreements with the workforce to address the consequences. There is another case on Hamburg Port, which is also interesting because it's about introducing new technology through collective bargaining. And there are also some lessons learned on how to do this in the best way. And then the most recent one is about the French Global Deal platform. It's about how Global Deal can play a role in promoting social dialogue. And we would actually encourage all governments that are partners to the Global Deal to set up these groups or platforms at the national level to gather social partners to discuss how to promote social dialogue. I'm also going to make some publicity for our most recent publications, the flagship report, which we issued last year on social dialogue skills and COVID-19. We have also revised the Global Deal brief on the contribution of social dialogue to gender equality. And this brief is available in French and Spanish too on our website. Well, there are many more briefs on our website, so I would encourage you to really have a look because they are all very interesting. But I think that's enough about the Global Deal. I think it's high time to start the training. I also want to say, though, that the Global Deal team is available to answer any questions, either if you want to write in the chat or if you want to approach us afterwards. We will also put up our email address afterwards, after the meeting, so in case you want to contact us. But now I would like to hand over to Sylvain Baffi, who is the Senior Program Officer at the ITC. And Sylvain will lead this session today, and he will explain the program to us and introduce the speakers. So over to you, Sylvain.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Veronica, for the invitation. And I'm happy to facilitate this session today, and welcome to this masterclass series on the sound industrial relations devoted to grievance handling. First, before I give the floor to the first speakers of today, I would like to show and to very briefly look at the agenda together with you. What we are planning to do today is, first of all, to try to get a better understanding of the ILO's industrial relations work, and my colleague Christophe and Land-Kazlauskas, with the labor relations and collective bargaining specialist at the ILO, will be talking to us about what is the ILO doing in that field, before actually we move to one specific area of the work of the ILO, which is the training and especially the industrial relations global toolkit. And specifically today, we're going to introduce to you, in addition to the toolkit, this self-guiding e-learning tool on Grievance Handling that we have very recently completed and published. So I'll be introducing to you this safeguarding tool, and then we're going to try to look a bit more in details about the practicalities and the importance of grievance mechanism. First, with Chris Land-Kazlauskas, we're going to try to see the importance of grievance mechanisms at the workplace and why they're so important for sound industrial relations, before we move to two other ILO colleagues and we look at country level or at a regional level at a number of examples. The first examples will be on the establishment of effective grievance mechanisms in Ethiopia's garment and textile industry. An ILO colleague, ITCILO, who is a program manager of a technical cooperation project in Ethiopia, will be telling to us, will be discussing and will be presenting about what the ILO is doing in Ethiopia in that particular sector to promote the use of grievance and to have a solid grievance mechanism. And then with Mandra Naidu, with the Social Dialogue and Labor Administration Specialist in our ILO Decent Work Technical Support Team for South Asia and Country Office for India, we're going to look at what the ILO is doing to strengthen grievance handling mechanism in South Asia and its linkages with the COVID-19 pandemic. So how can grievance mechanisms at the workplace can help employers and workers at the workplace. Then there will be time for questions and answers and for interaction. And there will be some time for discussing, and we hope to hear from you about the use you're making, or possible good stories about the use of grievance mechanisms at the workplace. In terms of participation, just to remind you, if you're not aware, that if you have any questions, any comment at any time, please use the chat function. You can liaise directly. You can ask questions to our experts. So we encourage you to use the chat functions during this meeting. And the second important rule for us to take the most out of that session is if you can keep yourself muted if you are not speaking, so that we have a conducive environment for discussing together. So after these some rules, and I would like to to give the floor to the first speaker, and I'm going to ask my colleague Christopher Land-Kazlauskas to actually tell us a bit more about what the ILO is doing in the field of industrial relations as an opening to this session. Chris, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sylvain, and thanks to the Global Deal for the invitation to participate in this masterclass. And it's a wonderful opportunity to share with you a little bit the work that we have ongoing in the ILO in relation to industrial relations. Yeah. So just to say in a very short compressed period, we're actively engaged around the world. You've got actually one of our decent work team specialists and one of our very important projects in Ethiopia, the project manager from there, sharing with you some very specific experiences from one of the regions, and again, one very country specific example of the development cooperation work that we're doing and the work that we're doing to provide policy advice and guidance to governments and social partners for how we can actually do social dialogue and industrial relations better. The ILO, as you probably already know, is a standard setting organization. So we're an organization with conventions, recommendations. I could spend an hour talking about those, but I won't. They're really at the core of everything that we do. So we talk about the freedom of association, the questions of freedom of association and collective bargaining. We're really looking at what it says in Conventions 87 and 98, for instance, and how we take the principles in those conventions and turn them into actual, change on the ground, how we can actually move the needle, so to speak, in countries with constituents, whether it be at the enterprise level, at the sectoral level, or nationally, and even to some degree internationally, working in support of some global framework agreements and other efforts to, promote sound industrial relations through cross-border social dialogue. So let me just focus first on the research that we do. First of all, we try and produce cutting edge knowledge products on the state of the art in industrial relations. We were very, very fortunate and very pleased to participate in producing the flagship report on social dialogue and skills. I was personally involved in the drafting of the first flagship report of the Global Deal on building trust in a changing world of work. But we're also involved in research on COVID-19 and collective bargaining. We're publishing research on gender equality and collective bargaining, including the brief with the Global Deal. We are also involved in a lot of work at regional level. Mahendra will maybe say one or two words about the work that he's been doing in producing some very, very interesting research looking at what are the different social dialogue mechanisms and bodies in the South Asia region, for example. This gives us an opportunity to get a sense of where things are at, and it helps us with the next point that I want to talk about. But let me just really first, before I get into the technical assistance and technical advice, say one more word about research. We've got a couple of very important databases that we've been developing with the generous support of the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA. One is on industrial relations legislation, and the other is on industrial relations data, so trade union density, collective bargaining coverage, and those sorts of things. These are really being used every day now to provide resources, to provide information, to help to move things forward at country level. So I was just drafting a note this morning about the fact that we were able to use in Mongolia the industrial relations legislative database to find good, interesting pieces of legislation that would be relevant to a process that's been going on in Mongolia to reform the labor legislation. Here, we're actually making use of ILO knowledge products and knowledge tools to help to advise and guide our constituents in countries on the ground. We're also trying to use those to develop other fact sheets and issue briefs. If you go on our website, www.ilo.org/collective bargaining, you'll find a series of fact sheets, issue briefs that provide you with very straightforward, simple information on the subjects of collective bargaining, the effects of collective bargaining, and we'll be continuing to produce those going forward. So that takes me to the next point, which is really the focus of what we're trying to do these days, and that is providing high quality and responsive technical assistance and technical advice to our constituents on the ground in a variety of different countries. And we do this not only relying on the research that we produce, but we're very fortunate in the ILO to have a group of what are called decent work teams. So we have specialists who are knowledgeable industrial relations experts. Mahendra's here with us, Kittist is here with us, but we've got them actually all around the globe. And they're there ready to support our constituents in developing, designing, implementing, and then reviewing and adjusting technical assistance, development cooperation projects, and a whole variety of different interventions that are intended to help to promote sound industrial relations, to promote inclusive and effective systems of collective bargaining, to ensure that grievance mechanisms are not only fit for purpose and existing, but actually are being used. And that's something that we'll talk about in a few minutes, I think, in terms of the importance of grievance mechanisms. This is all coming together, the research, the knowledge, with our development, with our capacity building work. So everything that we're talking about here, the research that we're doing, the technical advice that we're giving, all of these things are also feeding into our capacity building work. And this is where the ITC has really come in very strongly. And again, with the support of SIDA and with the partnership with the Global Deal, they've been able to really develop some very interesting state-of-the-art training materials, capacity building materials that are really helping us to understand what are the issues, how in concrete terms can I change the way I address an issue or the way my organization approaches an issue, And what are some of the skills, both soft and hard skills, that I need to actually engage in collective bargaining successfully, to actually make sure that we have a grievance procedure in my company that's going to eventually be used and provide us with a mechanism, a formal mechanism for identifying, addressing, and remedying problems in the workplace. So these are very, very concrete and very practical skills that we're passing along. And we'll be hearing more about that from our colleagues in the masterclass. But the idea here is that these things together make up sort of one holistic ILO approach, which is based on international labor standards. It takes at its core international labor standards, but it basically percolates out. It refines those principles, it identifies those principles and brings them through in training materials that are interactive, that I hope you'll find interesting, and that are actually speaking to people at the factory level. Let's be honest, nobody in a factory in Bangladesh working as a supervisor or as a line lead or whatever is going to be too worried about what Article 2 of Convention 98 says, right? But our job as the ILO is to make sure that those principles are actually coming through in our development cooperation work, in our technical assistance and advice when we're working with countries that are going through labor law reform or similar institutional reforms, regulatory reforms, or in training and capacity building for workers and employers and governments. So this gives you an idea of where this all sits. And I'm really, really, really pleased to see these self-guided, self-learning modules that have been developed. These are going to be really great. And not only in the context of the COVID pandemic. I think everyone saw COVID and had to shift focus and really move toward how do we get something that's going to go from a face-to-face learning activity to something that's much more self-guided and self-directed. But even if we continue down this road of doing a lot of things via Zoom calls, and this is like my 27th or 28th Zoom call today. So even if we're doing things by Zoom, this idea of having self-guided and self-directed learning can actually help to develop this sort of blended or hybrid approach to learning, where workers and employers and governments who are going to be participating in these trainings can go through the self-guided process first, thereby saving an awful lot of time, where we can invest more time on building the skills necessary when we are actually engaging in the capacity building work where we're face-to-face or across Zoom. So that gives you an idea of sort of where this work sits within the broad spectrum of work that we're doing in the ILO. I haven't mentioned much about the International Labor Conference, but there's loads that goes on there as far as further standard setting and so on. We've got a big discussion coming up on inequality, which is going to have an important implications for collective bargaining and labor relations. But hopefully that just gives you a good idea of sort of where the ILO is coming from as far as the kind of holistic approach we're trying to take to promoting sound and healthy industrial relations. So, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this introduction to the work of the ILO and about what the ILO is doing. I'm going to actually continue a bit kind of presenting what the ILO is doing, looking at some specific elements of the toolkit. So I would like to show you a bit what the toolkit is about very briefly, and then I would like to show you and invite you, and I hope it's going to give you a bit of appetite to go to the toolkit and to complete our self-learning tool on grievance handling. So I would like to show a bit of a couple of slides about what the toolkit is about, and then I will basically walk you through a bit of the toolkit. So if you just allow me a second for me to share my screen, and I think that now you should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation. And so I would like to spend 5 minutes just to tell you a bit what the toolkit is about and why we believe it's an important tool for our constituents. So what the toolkit is about, it's a set of training materials for the promotion of sound industrial relations. So it was developed, we started to develop the toolkit some years ago with the idea of having, as Chris mentioned, one holistic approach to industrial relations, obviously backed by international standards, but we wanted to have a set of training materials covering a number of variety of topics, such as collective bargaining policy, practices, grievance handling, workplace cooperation, etc., etc. We wanted to have one set of training modules that our colleagues can use, can refine, and can basically use in their daily work at the enterprise sector or on national level. The toolkit now is covering this different thematic area. I'm going to show you later that we are planning to launch some of them actually during the week of March. So if you go to the toolkit right now, you won't see the last one. You will see up to soft skills development, but we got new modules that will be released soon because we see the toolkit as something in movement, and that will continuously move and get always better and more sophisticated. These materials are coming from the work of the ILO, its training centers, its specialists over a number of years. We've been doing an effort to try to put that all together, try to see what was working best, and try to see out of all the training materials developed over the years by the ILO, which one was the best. And we've been complementing those materials with new training activity, new training modules where we felt that there was a vacuum that need to be filled. So our toolkit is on the, so what can you find on the toolkit? And I'll show you in a few seconds. Training activities, supporting materials to strengthen the skills and capacity of government officials, representative of trade unions, employers organization, etc. This training material is classified by target groups. So we try to make some differentiations. We try to give advices in terms of when to use what training materials and complexity for trainers. So according to the skills of the trainers, we have been trying to differentiate these training materials. And it aims to give indications in terms of time frames and some tips to foster the success of training activity. So these training activities, these training modules are on the eCampus of the ITCILO. You have all received the link to register if you haven't been registered first. The toolkit can be accessible only by being a member of the ITCILO eCampus, which is free of charge, and the material is there. For the toolkit structures, I'll show you in a second. We've got some thematic area which are divided into different units, and each unit is divided into different materials that will possibly answer to some different training needs, different target audience, different profiles. So in the toolkit, you are basically able as a trainer to go and to select and to see case study, group exercises, different training methodology for you to better, we hope, better design and deliver your training activity for constituents. This is what we call the Lego approach. For those that have kids, or for those that have been a kid one day, taking different bricks and making your own toy out of the different bricks. The training units can be used independently. Our idea is not to say, do this, do that, but rather to give a capacity for our trainers, our colleagues, to be able to select out of a range, out of a variety of training resources, what they feel is the best training materials for their target audience, based also on their capacity. So training units can be used independently. Most of the times, I would say it's up to the training designers to create the training curriculum based on the skills, the time that they've got at their disposal, the kind of training they want to do. There are some recommendations from time to time to how to link different units together. But the idea is to say, those are tools at the disposal. We give you some tips, we give you some advice, but if we want to multiply training, if we want to multiply the capacity to deliver up-to-date presentations, we want to give the capacity of trainers to feel that they can manipulate and they can handle the tool. Additional resources that you will find on the toolkit are icebreakers with references to industrial relations, conflict management, for you to start, for you to develop training activity and to start activity. Tips and ideas about how to adapt your training activity, your curriculum design, and how to make it best according to our experience. Does not mean that it's a recipe for success, but we give you some indication in terms of what we see can work, and it's always available and accessible on the eCampus of the ITCILO, as I mentioned previously. We had some support from the global deal to co-finance the creation of some units, or to finance the digitalization of the modules, especially our self-learning tool on grievance handling, collective bargaining, and workplace cooperation, the translation of some training modules into French, the development of some new modules. So we are very thankful to receive this support, and we're going to show you some of the outcome of this support in a few minutes. And just to say, what we are planning to do in March 2021 is the launch of the self-guiding e-learning tools on grievance handling, workplace cooperation, and collective bargaining. We are actually working on a new e-platform that will be multi-language on the ITCILO eCampus for the toolkit. And we are planning to upload some new training modules that we have mentioned before, so that we have a more, let's say, up-to-date and complete toolkit. Before I walk you briefly through the toolkit, and especially the self-guiding tool, just to say what we see as a next step for that in terms of capacity building. As mentioned by Chris, we guess the future will be a combination of self-learning tools at the disposal of the people, so that they can train themselves when they want, or including into some training offers on training curriculum design, and what we call synchronous and asynchronous training. So we are planning to try to use these tools to multiply the capacity of our constituents to develop their capacity, and not only, but also when we're going to hopefully one day resume face-to-face learning or distance learning, we're going to try to use them to maximize the time that people are spending together or are spending with the trainers. What we see as the benefits of this, especially self-learning tool, is the expansion of the outreach of our tool. We have no participants number limit. We have no time limit. People can access whenever they want, and there's no borders, no visa to go somewhere, no flight to catch. So we see it as a possibility to expand and to disseminate the ILO message on industrial relation, maybe to factories, to sectors, to countries where it will be difficult for us to go. So I would like to very briefly show you in practice what the toolkit looks like. I know from experience that when you are trying to do a bit something on the internet, this is the moment where your system does not work that well. So I hope that I'm not going to have any trouble with my connection. So I'm going to... Okay, good. Let me share again. And I think that now you are able to see the toolkit, what it looks like online. So what you see is a bit different from what you see. I've got special credential as a managers of the toolkit, so I can see there's a number of areas that we are very only selected people can access, such as the management of the toolkit. So don't worry if you see things that seems a bit weird, but this is what the toolkit is about, and you will see an introductions and a couple of stuff regarding methodology and how to use the toolkit. And then you've got the different topics that I've mentioned to you: collective bargaining, policy, practice, negotiation skills, workplace cooperation, grievance handling, conflict dynamics, soft skill development. Those are the different topics. And by a simple quick click, you can access the different units of the toolkit. So this is, for example, the unit on negotiation skills, where you can see this index of training activity, typical mistakes in negotiation and experience of negotiations. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see that we propose, based on this topic, a number of training units that trainers can explore, they can pick, they can see, and they can decide which one fits better. I'm just going to go to the grievance handling because it's going to be the topic of my presentation. Just to see in the terms of grievance handling, this is what we currently have online as a topic. And by clicking on these different modules, people are able to access activity, PowerPoint presentations, training units with training objective, target group, ideas about how to do, and then basically the possibility for you to access training methodology about how to do, how to deliver, how to do a good session on sources of rights and obligation. So for each of these units, you've got 1 or 2 or 3, sometimes even more training units for people to be able to learn and to develop interactive, participatory driven training methodology. So those are some case studies, there are role plays, there are quizzes, and there are a different way for people to look. I will let you explore this tool. You all have the address, but I would like to very briefly show you what is the topic of today. It's going to take a few minutes. This is the self-guiding e-learning tool that we've been developing, and that is also available online. This tool that I guess you can see right now give you the possibility to basically go through the different units as a participants and to get trained on grievance handling. So what we've been doing is to basically revise and manipulate the content of our training activity for people by themselves explore what are grievances, what are the basics of grievances, what are the, and then to have also an interactive experience by looking at a number of exercises, a number of documents. So through all the modules of the toolkit, you have some explanations about what grievances are about, sources of rights and obligations, how to develop grievance procedures. But you also have a number of scenarios that people can answer to. You've got some also, I'm going to just turn off the volume, but you also have some indications about role plays and screenplays that people can watch and they can answer, and they can basically check their understanding of what they've been doing. So this is basically what Chris will be saying as soon as I finish my presentation, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But what we've been doing is to put at the disposals online this tool for people to get trained. It's also accessible on mobile, so people can easily access it and watch it on their mobile. Or on tablet. We have been putting country examples for people, and we've been trying to give a possibility for people to get as much interaction as possible and to regularly check their understanding and their comments. So this is available online. This is at the disposal of the users of the toolkit, and it's accessible at any time. You can retake the training as much as you feel that you need to develop your understanding of grievances. We believe, we hope that it's going to be a tool for us to expand our outreach and basically sensitize about the importance of grievance handling and multiply the number of people that we know about our policies and our principles. So this is what the toolkit is about. You have all received a link to access it. You can all access the self-learning tool on grievance handling. And we really hope, I think it's just a click to send it to people that might be interested. So I think that we all hope that you will be interested to send and to spread the message that we've got this tool, which is available free of charge for people to get trained and for people to get to test their knowledge on grievances and get sensitized to the ILO message. So this is what the toolkit is about. And without waiting one more second, because we're already late on schedule, I'm going to ask Chris to tell us a bit more about grievances and why they're so important for the ILO and for sound industry regulation. I hope it will contribute to your appetite to discover the self-learning tool by yourself. Chris, over to you.
Thanks again, Sylvain. And I'm not sure how much I want to say now because I don't want to take away their interest from diving in and actually, trying to make use of some of the tool, which is super interesting and has been designed. I'm really impressed with how it's been developed. No, but just to say just a few words about what grievances are and why they're important. I mean, let's start from the point that conflict is a perfectly normal part of any kind of work relations, any kind of workplace dynamic, right? I mean, that's the reality. The conflict exists whether you're a blue collar worker, a white collar worker, a pink collar worker, whether you're, you know, irrespective of what country you're in. If you go to work and you're in your workplace, even sometimes with these virtual workplaces, conflict is a purely natural, normal part of that. What's important is how we manage that conflict, right? So how we decide to manage the conflict as workers or trade unions representing workers, as an employer or an enterprise wanting to have a responsive, you know, culture of you know, good industrial relations and identifying and resolving problems quickly. How we manage this makes all the difference. It can make the difference between a minor problem versus a very costly dispute that can have, you know, impacts on the reputation of the company. It can end up in an industrial dispute or a strike out in the street. It can actually make all the difference in terms of worker commitment and worker motivation to come to work. I mean, I think we can all think of, if we haven't experienced it ourselves, we can think of examples or talking to friends who've shared with us examples of, you know, difficult challenges that they've faced in the workplace that went unresolved and ended up making it so that you just don't want to go to work anymore. You just really are not looking forward to going through the door in the morning. It can have impacts as a result on worker productivity and on profitability. And it certainly can undermine, and again, this is something that I think the global deal is very committed to. It's certainly something that the ILO is committed to. It can undermine the building of trust, right? The trust relationship that needs to exist to have productive workplace industrial relations. It can get undermined if we don't manage problems, manage disputes, manage issues well. So what's the goal of a grievance handling process, a grievance mechanism? I think we can look at it in terms of like 4 main descriptors. I think the goal in developing a grievance handling mechanism is you want to make sure that it's quick, that workers are able to know where it is and how to access it, and that you're able to resolve the problem as close to the source as possible, right? So it's quick. You've got a problem. If the worker and the individual that they're having a dispute with can work it out between them, no more problem. If you're having a problem and the worker feels like they need to go and get a union rep involved, but they can sit down with the supervisor or whomever it is that they're having a problem with, and it gets resolved, boom, no more problem. Resolving it quickly, getting it dealt with at the lowest possible place. It should be uncomplicated. It shouldn't be something that's got 17 different you know, possible avenues that you go down. It should be a very simple process, uncomplicated, where everybody knows I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. This is what's going to happen, and this is how I can get it dealt with. It should be consistent. We want to make sure that worker X and worker Y having a similar problem and a similar set of circumstances are going to have that problem dealt with similarly. You don't want to have there be a perception that, you know, one worker is more favored than another, or that they're relying on different relationships, or however. You want to have it applied consistently throughout. And it's got to be fair. And I think these other descriptors also can help to bring in this question of fairness. A worker doesn't have to get exactly what they want at the end of a grievance procedure, but if they feel like they've been dealt with fairly and consistently, that they haven't been dealt with unfairly, they're more likely to accept the outcome of the process, okay? And that's really what we're looking for here. That's the last point that I want to underline as far as, underline, as far as the role, the goal of a grievance handling procedure. It's that it's resolution, it gets resolved, right? Quick, uncomplicated, consistent, and fair that leads to a resolution. It's probably not going to be the resolution that the parties, individual parties, were like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. No one's going to walk away feeling like, okay, you know, I've gotten 100% of everything that I want, but they can live with the outcome, right? So I think that's an important element in a grievance procedure, is that you feel like you're being dealt with fairly, irrespective of what whether you win, you're being dealt with fairly and consistently, and that you're able to get some sort of a quick resolution. I'm not going to spend too much time in talking about this, because we could actually spend a good deal of time on the subject, on this particular subject. But just to mention, there are fundamental differences between individual and collective disputes, disagreements between an individual worker and an employer versus a group of workers and an employer. There are also fundamental differences between rights disputes, which is a disagreement over an existing entitlement, something that's in the law or in a collective agreement or an employment contract or in the work rules that's being violated, versus an interest dispute. And an interest dispute is really focused on something that I want to improve on. We want our wages to go up. We want our working hours to be reduced. We want an additional bonus to be implemented. This is important when it comes to grievances for reasons I'll explain in a minute, but this is about a disagreement over future rights and obligations that one party or the other might want to see changed. Okay. So just to take a minute and talk a little bit about what a grievance actually is. So a grievance is a complaint by one or possibly more than one worker or workers against an employer. If it's entirely possible that more than one worker can have the same complaint, and those can be dealt with as a series of individual complaints, but more often you see them dealt with as a collective dispute. Again, getting to the point of consistency. Normally, this concerns an existing right. I was talking about the difference between a right, something that exists in your contract of employment, in the work rules, in your collective agreement, or in the law, as opposed to an interest, which is something you'd like to see improved in the future. So normally, a grievance procedure, a grievance happens when there's a violation of an existing right. A grievance procedure is intended to deal with mainly disputes over an existing right, but they can also be used to address, and this is, I'm quoting from the recommendation 130 from the ILO, any measure or situation which concerns a relationship between employers and workers. So it can deal with your terms and conditions, but it can also be any measure or situation concerning the relations between workers and employers, right? Now, but the most important distinction here is that it's not dealing with collective interest disputes, okay? I hope that that's really clear for everybody. Okay. Grievances exist because disputes arise in the workplace. As I said in the very beginning, conflict is a totally normal part of working, of a work environment, of a workplace. If you don't have a mechanism to deal with the problem, it doesn't make the problem go away. It's almost like arguing that we should shut down hospitals, and then we can point to the fact that there are fewer people going to the hospital, so there mustn't be any public health problems. We have institutions that are there to deal with health issues. We have institutions that have been developed and over the years to deal with industrial relations issues, to deal with workplace problems, and to help find resolutions to them. So that in existence of a formal mechanism for this doesn't mean that the problem won't exist. In fact, what it ends up meaning is largely that the problem could end up in the street, it could end up in the press, it could end up in a situation where motivation goes down, productivity goes down, profitability goes down, and there's really no winners in that respect. So the grievance handling procedure is important because it represents a safety valve, a safety net that releases tension and allows us to address conflicts, that these conflicts that naturally arise. It allows the workers to raise and settle grievances without fear of retaliation or victimization. It can promote a culture of compliance and remedy in the workplace. And it can actually help management. It can help the employer identify and eventually remove legitimate causes of frustration, dissatisfaction, or conflict in the workplace. So a grievance procedure, if we want to talk about it in its simplest terms, a grievance procedure consists of a series of definitions, but more importantly, steps that will be followed by a worker or a group of workers in resolving complaints that arise out of their work situation or concerning their rights and existing work arrangements. If we want to look at it like this, I think we can say that there are 6 elements. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are 6 elements in a functioning grievance procedure. You got the basic principles, objectives of the grievance procedure, the coverage, who's in and who's out, the rights and obligations. You'd have the procedure itself, and then you want to have sort of operational arrangements that would be put in place to make sure that the procedure is being used and being used effectively. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the basic principles. The basic principles that underline a grievance procedure are extremely important for its success or failure. A grievance procedure needs to be in writing. It needs to be understandable. It needs to be accessible, and it needs to be easy to follow. A worker who's in the factory should know where to go when they have a problem, what the steps are to find a solution, and how they can, what they can expect from the process. It should be agreed between the parties. This is where collective bargaining comes in. Grievance procedures are a very, very frequent subject of collective bargaining. The grievance procedure should be participatory as well. The workers themselves that have suffered what they believe to have been a violation of their rights or whatever should be able to participate in the process to find remedy. There should be a respect for workers' rights enshrined, baked into the system. In other words, there can't be retaliation. There shouldn't be impact on established rights of the workers for having used a grievance procedure. If a grievance procedure is used then eventually to retaliate against or reduce the rights that are enjoyed as a result of using the procedure, you can be pretty certain that there wouldn't be the further use of the procedure in the future, and workers will find other ways of getting their problems, bringing their problems to light. As I mentioned earlier, it should be quick, it should be timely, it should be time bound. I've seen many grievance procedures that include specific timings that, within 10 days, this needs to be done. Within 7 days, this needs to be done. Workers should also be given time off to participate. If on the management side, a human resource officer is engaged in resolving the problem, well, the worker that has the problem should also be given time off to participate. This isn't Chris Land-Kazlauskas speaking. This is what it says in the recommendation on grievance handling. The workers shouldn't abuse the system. And this is, again, where I think the distinction between dealing with collective interest disputes, where you want to make an improvement over something. Sometimes you see cases where workers can actually make use of a grievance mechanism in order to further their other aims. And that shouldn't be the case. The workers shouldn't use the system abusively. And also we have to recognize there's the right for workers or management to be represented in the process. Workers should have the right to be represented by whomever they choose, another worker, a union rep, etc. And an employer has the right to be represented by an employers association. The objectives should be absolutely clear. It should be a statement of intent by the workers and the employer of what the aims of the procedure are, that they want to address the complaints quickly and systematically, that they want to minimize disruptions to production, and they want to build mutual trust and confidence, just as some examples of what some of the objectives could be. The coverage is important in terms of to whom the procedure will apply, which workers are going to be covered. Can groups of workers also bring complaints? It should be made clear here that normally a grievance procedure, it's intended to be used by workers against an employer, not by management against workers. Management has disciplinary procedures and other mechanisms in place to deal with issues that they may have with the workers. The grievance procedure is not really intended to be used for that. And then the different rights and obligations that go along with it. No retaliation, the right to be represented, as I said earlier. There needs to be a respect for time limits, or there needs to be an agreement to extend time limits if that's in the interest of both parties. A grievance should be solvable at any stage, and it shouldn't eliminate the legal rights of a worker under to make use of other statutory systems available to them in the country. And then we've got the step-by-step procedure. There can be multiple steps. It can be short. It can be longer. This is really up to the parties themselves to determine. And then the purpose of the procedure gives you an idea of what it is that you really are looking to accomplish. So at the end of the day, if you have a grievance procedure that's been well designed, that's been designed through a process of social dialogue, preferably collective bargaining, you'll be in a situation where the workers are clear on what it is that they need to do to bring an issue to management and how that issue is going to be resolved. Just one final word, and this is just a little bit of a personal pet peeve. I think that we can all agree and understand, and maybe in the question and answers we can talk about this a little bit. A suggestion box is not a replacement for a grievance procedure. An app where a worker can say, I'm really upset about something, is not a replacement for a grievance procedure. We need to distinguish, and this is a pretty fundamental issue for me, we need to distinguish between an issue that needs to be addressed, that a worker has brought forward, and that the worker feels confident to bring the issue forward, and that they will not be retaliated against, and that it will be remedied, that it will be investigated, that there will be a dialogue process, at the end of which there will be some outcome. If you put a complaint into a suggestion box, it's a suggestion box, and that's where it ends. But to put in place a box, and I've been in some factories, to be perfectly honest with you, you see the suggestion box standing there, and you look over your shoulders, and you see the camera that's above the suggestion box as well. An important essential element of a grievance procedure is that workers make use of it. Sylvain, Mahendra, and I, we all stood together in a workshop in Bangladesh a few years back where we actually were asking people about to what extent is this grievance procedure used? And it was really telling to see the reactions that we got, you know, the number of grievances that were put forward. Having a grievance procedure that's being used is not a bad sign. And trying to come up with alternatives because workers might not feel confident or comfortable in using a procedure, well, for me, in my view, that calls for more attention being made to how can we address the root cause of why workers aren't using the procedure rather than trying to come up with some alternative arrangements, which if the employer is not serious in treating the grievances when they're being brought forward by a worker, you could certainly raise the question about whether they're particularly interested in a suggestion that gets put on a piece of paper and slid into a suggestion box. So that's in very, very short, well, I think I've run over, I'm sorry. Not short enough time, but I've tried to in a very summary way, explain a little bit more about grievance handling and how important it is for functioning industrial relations. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much. And I will invite everyone with questions and comments for Chris to use the chat box so that possibly he can start answering to some of these questions. But thanks again, Chris, for this explanation about the principles of grievance handling. And let's move to our next speaker to see at the country level what the work that the ILO is doing to promote the use of grievances. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you my colleague Kidis Shala, who is the managers of this technical cooperation project in Ethiopia, working in the garment sector. So Kidis, thank you to be with us. Welcome. And we are very much looking forward to hear about what you and your unit and your team are doing in Ethiopia in the garment and textile sector when it comes to grievances. So Kidis, over to you.
Thank you, Sylvain and Global Deal Secretariat for inviting me to share experience from Ethiopia. Before I talk about establishment of grievance mechanism in the sector, I would like to give you a bit of context about the sector and also the ILO work. In Ethiopia, the garment and textile sector is highly prioritized. It's one of the key sector in the development framework, as it is labor intensive and creating high employment opportunity. If we look at the government statistics, we found, above 200 garment and textile sectors, and creating employment opportunity for over 100,000 workers. And many of the workers are from the rural sector, being new to the formal employment. As Chris indicated, we see a number of grievances. And it was around 2017 when we started our intervention with support from SIDA, Series SIDA, and H&M, that we embarked on our improving industrial relation project in the sector. So when we did our brief analysis baseline survey, we found out that there are a number of factories without any grievance procedure. And for those with grievance procedure, as Chris indicated, they use the suggestion box as one of the key grievance procedure. And when we talk to the workers, they don't know even why they put the box. They don't even explain why the box are there, let alone to know the steps that they need to take. So with this, we started putting a training together with our global team, where Chris was instrumental in providing the first training to the team on the ground, and also with Sylvain. So we started by putting training to the factories, and as well as the stakeholders, the workers and employers organization at the sectoral level. We intentionally put this the factory level as well as the support mechanism to create enabling environment by bringing the employers and workers organizations. We bring a number of factories as a pilot, and we also coach them to develop their own grievance handling procedure, because sometimes some of the work need our support. So it's not like coaching and sitting and writing the grievance procedure for them, but providing them the knowledge base, and also giving them what the labor law and also the conventions which are ratified by Ethiopia are talking about. So we provided that, and a number of factories developed their grievance handling procedure. And we saw concrete results in terms of reduced cases going to the courts, and very good collaboration between the workers and employers. In some fact, in one of the factory, even the unions were seen as they were seen as fighters before, but with clear grievance procedures, as an ally with management, because the management could see that the number of cases going to the courts are substantially reduced. But we still have a number of challenges in the country because of high turnover. Those trained workers and management representatives kept on leaving the factories. So we said, what are we going to do? We cannot keep on training the workers. We cannot keep on training the management. So again, that's why we have, the importance of, again, going back to Turin and to develop the toolkit. So the toolkit and the self-guided training tools will be one of the way out for us in terms of addressing one of the sustainability challenge we have. So we're still working with the Turin Center to develop the self-guided tool. But when we developed the self-guided tool earlier, Sylvain was showing you all the training materials. It's available in English, but in Ethiopia, many of the workers don't speak English. So we don't want to give one training tool to management group and leave the workers behind. So we are translating all these training materials into the local language, and also bring the local context in terms of the tools to make it participatory and also attractive for the workers to take. So now we are in a stage whereby we are reviewing ourselves in terms of making sure that the workers and the managers, the newly coming factories, also have these training tools for them to start developing their grievance procedures. As part of the, earlier, again, Sylvain talked about the launch. The Amharic version, which is one of the local language, will also be launched in March. And we're very much excited to launch it and to work this with the workers and management, and give you more good news about, a very simple procedure developed in a participatory manner and used by the workers to resolve the challenge many of the found. I'm trying to save time, which is lost by my colleague, Chris. Over to you, Sylvain.
Thank you, Kidist. Thank you very much. We appreciate it very much. And also thank you very much to show us in practice in a factory, what does it mean and what's the direct impact of having grievance mechanisms that are accepted by employers and workers, and what's the direct impact on number of cases, and especially number of cases which are going outside the factory, and we all know the impact it can have. So thank you very much for both looking at time and also for the substantive input. I see that there are some questions in the chat box, but I would suggest that we continue by looking at different country examples, and I'm going to ask our colleague Mahendra Naidu, who is a social dialogue labor administration specialist in our decent work team for South Asia, to tell us a bit about what the ILO is doing, especially in the context of COVID-19 around grievances in a number of countries. So Mahendra, welcome. Thanks for being with us. I think that you're going to share a PowerPoint presentation in a few seconds. So, okay, over to you.
Thanks, Sylvain, and hello, everyone. I think my slides most probably are up now, but as Sylvain mentioned, I'm going to give you an overview of initiatives to strengthen grievance handling in South Asia, because this has become a particularly important issue post-COVID. And because what happened through COVID is we had an increase in South Asia of layoffs and also of retrenchments. Also to mention that all of the initiatives to strengthen grievance handling in South Asia have been based on the grievance handling module of the IR toolkit, which has been extremely helpful in the work that we have been doing in the sub-region. Just to give you a sense of South Asia, you'll see that there are 7 countries with which the ILO works in the sub-region. So we have Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. We do not work with Bhutan because it's not yet a ILO member state. Just to also give you an idea of the situation in South Asia, it comprises nearly a quarter of the world's population, but includes over a third of the world's people living in extreme poverty and hunger. Majority of workers are employed in the informal sector. Social protection coverage is extremely fragmented. So you'll see within that context, the economic and humanitarian impacts of the pandemic were immense. And to give you an idea of what those impacts were, based on data from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, South Asian economies are estimated to contract by between 1% to 4%. And this is from pre-COVID growth of over 6%. There have been declines in international tourist arrivals of over 70%. And the larger tourist destinations have been particularly hard hit. So we've had Nepal, India, and Sri Lanka that have suffered massive declines in tourist arrivals. MSME output losses are in excess of 50%. And crucially, also for South Asia, given that Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka are all major garment producing countries, we've seen shrinking garment production and sales. So for example, in Bangladesh, order cancellations led to revenue losses of about $3 billion. And that affected about 2 million workers, 80% of whom were women. And you must remember that in Bangladesh, the garment sector accounts for about 83% of exports. So it's a particularly significant economic sector. Based on ILO data for South Asia, average working hour losses of 16.2%, which is equivalent to 102 million full-time jobs, are estimated for the first 3 quarters of 2020. Labor income losses of $250 billion or 8% of GDP is estimated for the same period. And women and informal workers were disproportionately affected. So for example, in India, which where the informal sector comprises about 93% of the economy, about 400 million informal workers are at risk of being pushed into deeper poverty. In South Asia also, about 96% of young people are in informal employment. So you can see that the pandemic has had a particularly devastating effect, particularly on informal sector, women, and the youth. What was done through the Decent Work team in Delhi was a research initiative that Chris mentioned earlier, where we looked at what would need to be done from a social dialogue perspective to strengthen a collective response to the pandemic. And what we found, and this research was undertaken in very close collaboration with the tripartite constituents. So particularly the employers' bodies and the unions participated very strongly in the research. But there were two key issues that came up as being particular weaknesses for a stable industrial relations environment. The first is weak labor dispute resolution capacity. So if you look at labor departments in South Asia generally, they have very weak dispute resolution capacity. So workers raising cases at the Department of Labor generally don't get much success through conciliation. They end up then taking those cases to the labor courts. And the labor courts are already under extreme pressure. So if you look at Bangladesh again, and this is pre-COVID, there was a backlog of approximately 20,000 cases in the labor courts. So the situation is very likely a lot worse now, post-COVID. So you have a situation where workers aren't able to access justice efficiently or effectively through the labor judiciary, largely because the caseloads are too high. What constituents then raised in the research is the need for stronger labor dispute prevention mechanisms. And they package grievance handling as a key labor dispute prevention mechanism. The weakness here is that most enterprises lack grievance handling procedures in South Asia. It's very, very limited. And there's also a limited awareness of the importance of effective grievance handling mechanisms in enterprises. So here again, where you have grievances that could be resolved at an enterprise level, that's not being done because the capacity doesn't exist for it. So it ends up becoming a bigger dispute that then goes through to the Department of Labor, and then it is invariably escalated to the labor courts. So what we've tried to do in South Asia is to implement a two-pronged approach. The one focused on strengthening grievance handling, and in parallel to that, to look at how we can strengthen the dispute resolution capacity of labor departments. So particularly focused on building conciliation capacity in the labor departments. So what I will do is give you a brief overview of what we've been doing in 4 countries. The first is Bangladesh, and Chris has mentioned this already. What we did was to train trainers from government employers and trade unions on grievance handling. These trainers have been provided with resources through 2 mechanisms, one run by the employers and the other run by unions. And they in turn go out and provide training to management and workers in unionized and non-unionized garment factories. This work is being done through the Social Dialogue and Industrial Relations project in Bangladesh. In parallel to that, what we've been working on is training staff of the Department of Labor as conciliators. And Sylvain has been involved in the training of the initial tranche of staff as conciliators. And there's further work that we would need to do to build that capacity in the Department of Labor. In India, we have developed enterprise-level COVID-19 task force guidelines. And these guidelines basically promote the establishment of enterprise-level COVID-19 task forces at enterprise level. And the aim of these task forces is to achieve a joint management worker response to address the impacts of the pandemic at an enterprise level. We've trained trainers representing employers, organizations, and trade unions. And these trainers have the training included a strong focus on grievance handling. So the grievance handling module was incorporated into that training. In addition to that, a self-learning grievance handling module is also under development, and Sylvain has been supporting that process. And preparations are currently underway for the training of conciliators at a state level. So we'll be starting in one state, the state of Telangana, to develop dispute resolution capacity in parallel to the strengthening of grievance handling procedures. In Sri Lanka, we have developed grievance handling guidelines, and we developed those guidelines through tripartite workshops. These guidelines have been adopted by the Department of Labor, and we have also trained a tripartite team of trainers. Preparations are underway to pilot the guidelines in enterprises. With regard to the labor dispute resolution enhancement work, we are developing a rapid response labor dispute resolution mechanism. And we've already trained the first group of conciliators who would staff up that mechanism. Then finally, in Nepal, we have had an awareness session for government employers and trade unions on grievance handling. And we are currently developing a self-learning grievance handling module, which will then be rolled out in Nepal. So I will stop there. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mahendra. Thanks very much. And also thanks very much to making the connection between enterprise mechanisms for dispute resolution, such as grievance mechanisms, and the overall support to Ministry of Labor's or conciliation mediation. I see that Chris has been answering some questions on the chat box, which were mainly about the questions regarding the use of other mechanisms, such as questions box or suggestions box instead of grievances. And I see that there is a question that I think would be interesting to hear from our three speakers, Chris, Kidist, and Mahendra. It's coming from Wilbert Flinterman, and it's about the questions regarding: it is possible to build or to operate a viable grievance procedures according to the criteria mentioned by Chris without a trade union in the workplace. So I would maybe suggest, Chris, if you would like to give a bit of answers to that, and especially then I'd like maybe Kidist and Mahendra to react to the same questions in terms of the possibility to have effective grievance mechanisms at the workplace or without the existence of trade unions. So Chris, would you like to start first?
You know, I'm always happy to talk. I could just hit send because I've been typing a response now, and that might save some time. Because, you know, I do tend to enjoy talking, and this is a subject that's very dear to my heart. Look, of course, there's a possibility of setting up a well-designed and well-implemented grievance handling procedure. It doesn't require a trade union presence in the workplace, but it's certainly having a trade union there as a counterpart can help to design a procedure that the representatives of the workers are on board with, that they then can play a role not only in making sure people are aware of the procedure and how it works, but also in representing workers. What I would say is a lot of the things that you'll find in the self-guided mechanism, I'm just doing a little plug for the self-directed learning module that we're talking about here today, but a lot of what we talk about in there is going to be some of these basic principles. You can have worker representatives in a workplace. In Bangladesh, they're through the PCs. In Myanmar, they're through the WCCs, or at least they were until recently. So you might have some statutory mechanisms for worker representation, which may be union representatives or may not be. But looking at those basic principles we talked about earlier, the right for workers to be represented by a person of their choosing. Management shouldn't appoint who it is that's going to represent the worker, but the worker should be able to choose either a union rep or in a non-union workplace, and somebody, a colleague, a friend, a trusted person in the enterprise that can help bring them through the process. The protection against retaliation is important. The speed with which something is dealt with, the consistency with which something is dealt with. These things can be done in non-union workplaces as well. But again, as I've said, having a formal, representative, independent counterpart obviously is a help.
Thanks very much, Chris, for that. I'd like to get the sense of Mahendra and Kidist in terms of that questions of representation and in terms of what's the impact of the presence of trade unions in the workplace in terms of the use and the design of grievance mechanism. So I don't know, would like to start first. Mahendra, would you?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think in South Asia, we have a situation where union density is very low. So, you know, whether we like it or not, the point is, if we want to promote these guidelines broadly, we have to work with factories that are also non-unionized. And I think Chris's point is important, because what we've tried to do there is when we, for example, when we developed it in Sri Lanka, we had a workshop that comprised both unionized factories as well as non-unionized factories. So we had unions there, as well as worker representatives from the non-unionized factories, and I think it was good, because what we had was an exchange, and we also found that, well, and it wasn't surprising, the issues are fundamentally the same, whether we're dealing with a factory that's unionized or non-unionized. And we, you know, I think that the bottom line is to try and promote the establishment of guidelines across the board in all enterprises. So there, as Chris mentioned, there's a fair, transparent mechanism for the resolution of grievances at a factory level that then reduces pressure on the, you know, on the formal dispute resolution mechanisms as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mahendra. And Kidist, I'd
Yeah.
like to hear from you, please.
Yeah, exactly. I think the issue is we also tried it in unionized and non-unionized factories, and trust is key. So when you have union members elected democratically and do their job and trusted by their colleagues, then definitely they will see the value of addressing their grievances. But in the absence of that mechanism, of course, you know, having a system is important. So we work with non-unionized factories and we see the importance, but it's key to have workers being represented fairly and put the system, and if workers have question, and they also have a system to even question the system itself. But in the absence of their representative, it will be very hard to question the system, because they have to really follow what's existing. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the three of you, and especially for answering that question. So I'm monitoring the chat box. I don't see anything for now. So let's see a second if we've got some questions. Otherwise, I think we are very much on time on our schedule. And okay, so thanks very much for this. I think I'm going to hand over to Veronica in a minute. So just to say thank you very much to our speakers, to say that you have received the link of the safeguarding e-learning tool. We hope that you'll be able to send it to your colleagues or to people that might be interested. As I mentioned to you, there is no limit for that one, so we can have as many people that operate it. Please don't crash the ITCILO eCampus server by all accessing and running to the toolkit, but that will actually be an evidence of success. So thank you very much, and I'm going to hand over to Veronica. So Veronica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sylvain, and thank you to all the speakers and the ILO colleagues. It has been really interesting to learn about this training tool, and I do hope that all our participants will go to the eCampus to make use of this tool. It will also be available on the Global Deal website, and we will send you the web links. I think Andrea already wrote that in the chat. So that you can easily get all of this material. I know it's very late for some of you. I know we have several participants from Asia, and that's really great. And it's already evening in Asia. I think we might also have some from Latin America. At least we had somebody from Colombia registered. So for them, it's very, very early morning instead. But it's been a really interesting session, and so a big thank you to all of you. I will also ask Andrea if you could please put up our slide. It's already there. Perfect. So here you can see the other upcoming events. So the next session of the Masterclass series will be held on Wednesday next week on the 10th of March. It will be at the same time, 2 o'clock Paris time. And this is to try to cover the different time zones we have, which means it's always evening for Asia and it's always very early for the Americans, which is, it's perfect for Europe because it's in between, but that's always a constraint that we have. And this session will focus on workplace cooperation. And then, as you can see, we have one session every week in March until the last one, which will be held on the 30th of March, which is on gender equality. And I would also like to encourage you to participate in the launch of the self-guided e-learning tool on the 2030 agenda, decent work and social dialogue, which will be held now on Thursday. So on Thursday, we will launch another e-training tool that the ITC has developed for us that we are really excited about. This event is also open to the public, so it would be great if you would share the information with colleagues or others that you know. The Masterclass series is a bit different. We have particularly invited our global lead partners for this training, but the one on the SDGs that we will have on Thursday is a public event. I should also say that the recording of this session will be available on the Global Deal website, so that more people can benefit from this session and learn more about the training tool, so we can reach more people. And it will be also the same for the other Masterclass series. So I think that would be all from the Global Deal unit. Here we have the last slide. So as we said before, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. If you have questions specifically on the training tool, I would suggest that you get in touch with Sylvain and the colleagues at the ITC. But if you have any questions about the Global Deal or the publications I mentioned before, some of the research, good practice cases and so on, you are very, very welcome to contact us at the Global Deal, and you have the address here, and please follow us on Twitter as well. So thank you so much to all of you, and I hope to see you on Thursday and again next week for the second session of this Masterclass series. Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, bye-bye.